stoking that hate. And it's all for the purpose of what Tacitus and actually Philip II of Macedonia, the father of Alexander the Great, he's credited with coming up with this divide and conquer. Divide and conquer. You divide people, you turn them against each other, and then they're made that much easier to conquer, to defeat. And long before Philip II said it, Satan has been doing it. He's been doing it ever since. The first thing he did when he slithered into the Garden of Eden was to try to drive a wedge between God and man. Marxists have a very cynical understanding of human nature, and they understand this about human nature. You might not be able to change a man's opinion on his sports team. You might not be able to immediately change a man's opinion on his politics or his religion, but it is very easy to convince people they are victims. It is very easy to convince people they're victims. I said this in a little short video clip on Twitter, and Jordan Peterson immediately picked up on it and retweeted it with comment, because he recognized that it's true. If you read the Communist Manifesto, it's about victimhood at bottom. It's a godless narrative of victimhood. And Saul Alinsky, who saw his own work as a kind of sequel to the Communist Manifesto, he instructed his followers to stoke resentments. Now, perhaps you're thinking there's no rhyme or reason to what's going on in America. You see statues being toppled, you see riots in the street, you see defund the police, all these things, the trans movement, which we discussed in a previous podcast about what took place at the White House. And you may be thinking to yourself, well, there's no rhyme. None of this makes any sense whatsoever. I will agree with this. It makes no sense from a conventional point of view, from a conventional American point of view. You try various keys in that lock, and the tumblers don't line up. They do line up with a Marxist key. They do line up and make sense with a Marxist key, and that is because these are individuals who are following a playbook, and the playbook was written by Saul Alinsky. Saul Alinsky, who was born in 1902 and died in 1972, he was an American of Jewish parentage. He was born in Chicago and raised in Chicago, and he dedicated his life to Marxist thought, to Marxist writing, and to political agitation, which he didn't call political agitation. You know what he called it? Community organizing. Community organizing. And many of you already know that phrase because you know the most famous of community organizers, who we'll come to in just a few moments. But Alinsky was a great admirer of not only Marx, who was like himself merely a theorist, but he was an admirer of Vladimir Lenin, who was a practitioner of Marxist thought. Lenin's tactics for societal disruption have been implemented in one form or another by communists and fascists alike. In fact, Adolf Hitler used Lenin's tactics with his brown shirts. The brown shirts are like BLM or Antifa. The role that they were to play was societal disruption at the level of physical intimidation, of blocking roads, of throwing Molotov cocktails through business windows. This is what they were about, to intimidate you into either signing up and joining their ranks, or at the very least acquiescing and just quietly going along. And you see, Alinsky learned from both the tactics of Lenin and the tactics of Hitler. Now, again, these are Marxist tactics, but they can be used by fascists, they can be used by communists, but the point is the tactics themselves can be used by anybody. And Alinsky was studying these tactics for the purpose of the seizure of power. So what's happening in our streets today are Marxist tactics that have, they have no absolute beginning. They didn't begin with Saul Alinsky. They didn't begin with Hitler. They didn't begin with Lenin. They didn't begin with Marx himself. Actually, the Jacobins and further back were using these kind of tactics. But you might say that Saul Alinsky is the guy who organized all of this into a coherent little book, or I should say coherent books that are just simple little handbooks for people to use. So he's written two that have become holy writ for the left. The first is called Reveille for Radicals. It was published in 1946. It's not nearly as famous as the second, but it is a book that that has garnered a lot of attention in recent years. And then the much more famous Rules for Radicals.
Whatever.